Canadian fire departments are not in a position to assure fire safety across the country. It's shocking, but that's from a new report out this morning from the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs. Fire chiefs are in Ottawa hoping to convince the federal government their departments do not have the capacity to respond adequately to more housing, lithium battery fires, or even next year's wildfire season. Joining us this morning from Ottawa is Paul Boissonneau. He's a board member with the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, and he's a fire chief of Oakville, Ontario. Good morning.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. Thanks for having me.
Why is Canada's capacity to respond to fires so diminished right now?
Well, we have issued the report that speaks to basically the two primary components that we are needing to discuss. It's the need for a national fire administration, and it's the need to discuss the aging infrastructure and equipment that has been challenged amongst our fire departments for many years. The Joint Emergency Preparedness Program that was stopped in 2013 needs to be reinstituted and a modernized version created.
I know that at least one of those things is going to require more money and some resources. And you and I have spoken before about our country's reliance on volunteer firefighters, which is a number that always surprises me and other people too. Why are there so few resources being dedicated to something that is such a crucial emergency service like fighting fires?
Well, when you think about our neighbors to the south as an example, they've had a National Fire Administration for over 50 years. And by comparison, that fire administration usually gives out somewhere in the neighborhood of over $350 million to subsidize fire departments for aging equipment and infrastructure. This year alone, our Canadian census has shown that 54% of our fire departments have deferred purchases for critical equipment. So if you use the analogy of proportional population, Canada should be investing somewhere around $35 million towards fire and life safety and emergency equipment. And our report is essentially asking that a modernized version of JEP start at about $10 million.
So we're below that right now. That's a big gap. Can you explain for us further, what is a National Fire Administration? What would that look like in Canadian terms?
Yeah, so a National Fire Administration, it exists in many other countries, as I've mentioned the US, but it also exists in New Zealand, Australia, Japan, many other countries. It's a coordination of federal policy to ensure that that policy meets the local fire department needs. It's also a coordination when the authority having jurisdiction, which is usually a fire department, when we're talking about wildland fires or housing issues or lithium-ion batteries, it's to ensure that all the various departments in the federal government are able to speak to one another through a unified voice and ensure that those 3,200 fire departments across Canada are getting the resources and policy support that is needed.
When we have a headline like that we are not adequately resourced to be able to fight fires or provide adequate firefighting safety in this country, what does that look like? Somebody calls in, there's a fire emergency. What does that lack of funding look like on the front line?
So the front line can be anything from, as I mentioned, aging infrastructure equipment, so our equipment, our apparatus, our personal protective gear is also, in many cases, deemed to be substandard or beyond the 10-year replacement value. And certainly when we're dealing with the climate crises that we have been over the past number of years, and our report is showing that we are not going to be ready for the 2025 wildland fire season, we're looking at greater taxing of resources. Our volunteer firefighters in many cases are being deployed for an extenuating amount of time. And it's just becoming more and more challenging to ensure that we're responding not only to these major emergencies, but also the continuity of business operations for everyday emergency response.
Chief Boissonneau, I want to ask you about something that was new to me and something I hadn't considered. We talk a lot about the housing crisis. It's hitting every province and territory. But how is the expansion of housing supply impacting fire departments' ability to control fires?
Yeah, so certainly what a National Fire Administration would do is it would create those policy components that deal with fire and life safety issues to ensure that the housing, building homes faster is not the issue. Ensuring that we have fire and life safety parameters during those code changes and expansion and rapid housing development, that's where the expertise amongst all the fire departments across this country through a National Fire Administration would be so assistive to ensure that parliamentarians fully understand before any policy is made that they understand the risks associated with fire and life safety.
All right, Chief Paul Boissonneau with the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, coming to us from Ottawa, where you've got some important conversations coming up this week. Thanks for making time for us.
Thanks so much for having us.
If you liked that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.